Welcome, everybody, to the Mormon Newscast. It is Monday, January 19th, 2026. We're just getting started, but hit that like button, hit the subscribe down below. I'm joined by my colleagues, Rebecca Biblioteca, Radio Free Mormon. How are the two of you tonight?
I'm great.
Fantastic.
Awesome. I'll put the slideshow up here. I had a little fun with the thumbnail. You can see the young adult LDS folks down there at the bottom, quite bored in their meeting. I tried to figure out a way to have things in Mormonism disappearing, and I thought of the Back to the Future photo with Marty McFly on it and his brother and sister fading away. And I thought, there's the temple, there's the logo, they're fading out of view. The decline.
I actually got that reference. I thought it was very clever. I saw that in the theaters back in 1985. And I went to see it with my fiance the night before we got sealed forever in the Dallas, Texas temple in July of 1985. And ever since then, I can't help but think of Back to the Future as a horror movie.
All right. Well, there's that. The decline of Mormon devotion. That's our main story tonight. Measuring Mormon devotion. Our other stories are LDS missionary dies days before farewell. Rebecca will be bringing us that story. Radio Free Mormon is covering a story where Mormon podcasters plan to drown out the critics. Can't wait to hear that. Rebecca will be covering also a story about a man arrested in that recent LDS funeral shooting that seemed to be gang warfare. We'll find out more tonight if that's the case. RFM is covering a story of where the Mormon Church buys Texas. The whole state.
Yeehaw.
The whole state, RFM, huh?
They have got so much money, they even took a little bit of Louisiana.
I love it. All right. And then Rebecca will be covering our final two stories. Canadian area reps weigh in on legislation that involves the church, and LDS Church in the oil business. That worked out for Jerry Jones. He bought the Dallas Cowboys. I wonder what the LDS Church will buy with their oil money. So we'll find out here. I'll start off with the first story, but before we do that, we do want to wish everyone a happy Martin Luther King Day. And hope everybody at least spent a moment today thinking about all the things that have gone on in American history to fight for the rights of others in the civil rights movement. And so today's Martin Luther King Day, January 19th, 26. Anything you want to say about the holiday? Otherwise, I'll jump right into it. All right.
Well, it's a day that I always think about. And, I was around, I was alive. I was 8 years old in April of 1968. But disconnected enough from the outside culture. I mean, I'm in second grade, and I don't think I was aware of it at all. I do remember, however, that my parents, who never, ever took us kids to church anywhere or went to church themselves, there was one exception to that rule, and that was that Easter. And looking back, I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. All right. So the first story tonight came out of the Religion News Service, and we know our good friend Jana Reese over there. She was the one who headed up this story. The title of the story was "Younger Mormons Are Highly Devout in Some Ways, but Less in Others," the study shows. And the title sort of implies that we're going to find a few things that they were more in and a few things they were less in. And what the article seemed to show me was that Mormons were less devout in a lot of ways, and maybe more devout in just a few ways. So with that, we'll jump into this one. I want to note a couple of things to set this up. Marlon Jensen, back in 2011, said when he was being asked about people leaving the church over the controversial issues, this is right in the infancy stage of the gospel topic essays, long before they're published. The church is realizing they've got a problem, and it needs to be addressed, that they have not been honest enough with their members, have not shared enough information. And Marlon Jensen noted, since Kirtland, we've never had a period of, I'll call it apostasy, like we're having right now, largely over these issues. And he retracted it partially later on when asked about it again. It was noted, Jensen noted that the critics were overstating his remarks, saying, quote, "To say we are experiencing some Titanic-like wave of apostasy is inaccurate." Well, I'll just say he's correcting himself, because he's the one who said we have not had an apostasy like we were having in 2011 since Kirtland. And Kirtland was a Titanic sort of wave of apostasy. So
the Titanic was an iceberg. Can I just say it? There was no wave.
Yeah, it was an iceberg. You hit a wall, the internet came on board, and folks now have information at the tip of their fingers, literally. All right.
He might have been thinking of the Poseidon Adventure, one of my favorite movies where it was a wave. Who knows?
Well,
That's right.
sometimes I wonder if it's 20,000 leagues under the sea. But the other one that I wanted to make mention of before we jump into this data was Quentin Cook back in 2015, right in the middle of the gospel topic essays having come out, and starting in 2013, 2014, a bunch of them came out, and in 2015, a few more. And he noted that some have asserted that more members are leaving the church today, and that there is more doubt and unbelief than in the past. This is simply not true. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has never been stronger. By the way, whenever a person has to tell you a thing, you should wonder if the thing they're telling you is not true when it shows up this way. All right. The number of members removing their names from the records of the church has always been very small and is significantly less in recent years than in the past. I just want to note, too, just a few months from this moment, November 2015 happens. And from what I heard, a lot of people resigned because of that moment. So at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, I think Quentin Cook, if he would have seen around corners, he might not have said that. Okay, now we'll jump here into the data. So church news, we've seen these all over the place. These are the quotes that have showed up in the last year or so, 6 months maybe. Church News, a living record of the restoration. They had a titled article, Responding to the Call of the Prophet, More Missionaries Serving, More People Joining the Church. Another headline there, the Church of Jesus Christ announces the addition of 55 new missions in 2026. The three quotes from the first article, but the reality is more people are coming to the Church of Jesus Christ than we've seen in decades, Elder Bassett said. Another quote, every region of the world is seeing an acceleration in the growth of convert baptisms.
Obviously not true. The first one's not true. The second one is obviously not true.
And the last one, the number of missionaries serving right now in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has reached a high mark of around 80,000. I don't know who's playing with the numbers, but the data, again, says very differently. We've been pointing this out over recent weeks. So the first one, there were several markers in the article. I'll go through each of them. First one, young adult devotion has dropped sharply and measurably. Data point, among Latter-day Saints ages 18 to 30, full religious devotion has declined dramatically over time. Using three core markers of devotion, belief, practice, and identity, researchers found that 57% of 18 to 30-year-olds met all three devotion markers between 2008 and 2012. Only 37% today. That's a 20% drop in less than 2 decades. Millennials show the same pattern, 55% down to 38%. Older members, by contrast, have remained relatively stable. The young people of the church are significantly less devoted to the LDS Church. So bottom line, this is not growth, this is contraction, especially among the generation of church claims that it is stronger than ever. Again, Quentin Cook said that in 2015. It wasn't true then, it wasn't true in 2018, and it's not true in 2026. So there's that one. Next one. This is not a young people grow out of it phase. The argument that some people want to make is, okay, it's in the 30s, but by the time they get older, it's right with everyone else. No, they were comparing past generations at this age, and that's where they're noticing the difference. Today's young adults are less religious than previous generations were at the same age. This matters because defenders often say young people always drift and then they return later. Wrong. The data does not support that. Using the Cooperative Election Study, strangely, ironically named CES, the acronym there, the largest publicly available data set of Mormons with over 9,000 LDS respondents across 2 decades.
Wow.
Researchers compared boomers when they were young versus Gen Z and millennials at the same age. Today's young adults are significantly less religious than earlier generations were in their youth. Again, this study is going after Mormons only. We are not seeing this is not the same kind of trend as in the world generally. I'm just saying that the thing I'm talking about right now does not encompass other religions. This is just Mormons that we're talking about tonight in this study. Today's young adults are significantly less religious than earlier generations were in their youth. Bottom line, this is not a temporary life stage. It's a generational shift, and it's not reversing. Daily religious practice has dropped sharply among younger members. Data point, only 1 in 5 younger Latter-day Saints report daily scripture reading. Compared to older generations, younger members show steep declines in daily scripture study, daily prayer, and in garment wearing. By the way, you wonder why they're making room for you to use new editions of the Bible? One reason is because the leaders are seeing the data that the young people of the church don't want to read the Mormon scriptures anymore. The biggest drop occurs between the boomer, silent generation, and Gen X, and the lower level continues forward with millennials and Gen Z. So there is a big divide between the older members of the church and the younger ones, and the younger ones are not playing the same games of Mormon belief that the older folks did. Every generation after the oldest is less compliant across basic devotional behaviors. Bottom line, the foundational habits of Mormon daily life are eroding, not holding steady. You wonder why they're watering the church down? It's because the members of the church are watering it down first, and the brethren are just trying to meet them. Yeah. Okay, next. Confidence in LDS prophets has collapsed among younger members. Only 42% of Gen Z members say they know the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 are prophets of God. More than half the members of the church claim they believe, or should say they know, that the prophet, the first presidency, the quorum of the 12, the top 15 are prophets of God. 58% lack confidence in that belief. You would not have seen that. You would have found, if you would have gone back to, say, the 90s, you would have found that essentially just about, I'll say 95% of believers, and again, I'm only guessing here, but 95% of believers would have said they believe the top 15 to be prophets of God. And even among the inactives of the church, I think you would have found 60 or 70% of them who would have said that. And so I think this is just an incredible stat. By the way, compare that with older members, and this points to what I'm saying. 71% of boomers and the silent generation say they know this is true. I will say, I think that's even less than what we would have found from that same group in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. This is a nearly 30-point drop in prophetic confidence. This strike.
It was a shock. It was a shock. And it would be talked about for days. If anybody in fast and testimony stood up and said, I believe, I don't remember it happening. Not back when I joined the church in the late 70s.
That's not even to get into, I have questions or I have doubts. That language was not even present, as you point out, RFM. When you go back far enough, everybody got to the pulpit, including the kids getting whispers in their ears of what to say, that I know.
I have a story about that, and I was extremely young. I was under 10, and a young woman stood up in Fast and Testimony. It was when you passed the mic around. She was probably in her 20s, and I remember she had short hair, and she said, I don't know that the prophet is really the prophet or that he's really talking to God. I like being here, but I don't know any of this. And I remember just being stunned, even though I was under 10. I do not remember how old I was, and my mother saw the look on my face, like I was very intent about this. And my mom said, she has some mental issues. That's what my mom whispered to me. This is a memory that is 50 years old. And I will never forget hearing somebody say into the microphone, I don't know that this is real, because I felt that. I've talked about how I'm an agnostic, atheist, little child. I never heard anybody say that. I couldn't believe it. And I still remember it to this day.
Yeah, this strikes at the very core of LDS authority, which depends on members believing that leaders speak for God. And so the rhetoric is the ongoing restoration has come about because the church sees it needs to make a swift directional change in regards to how it does Mormonism for the younger generation of the church. And it needs to figure out how it shows up in a way that appeals to them. And even if it can't maintain quite their belief, it can at least maintain their attendance and hopefully their tithing. So
I guess raising the bar didn't work out so good.
No, this appears like a lowering of the bar, doesn't it? The believers have become less believing, and the church is changing its format, its theology, its approach so as to make the bar lower so that more people can still stay around. It's even changed the garments, which if you would have told us three here back in the 90s that was going to happen, none of us would have believed that. Bottom line, when fewer than half of young members believe church leaders are actual prophets, the authority model breaks down. All right, next one. Among current members, the traditional gender gap in religiosity has disappeared. We hit on this months ago. It used to be that females in the LDS Church were more observant, more faithful, more active in the church, and that it was harder to get the men to show up. Today, they're almost equal, and it wasn't because the men came up to the women. It was because the women stepped back from being as faithful, devout, and observant and stepped down to where the men were. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just talking about their approach with Mormonism being as close to what the brethren would like versus where they actually are. So among current members, the traditional gender gap in religiosity has disappeared. In earlier research, LDS women were about 9 points more religious than men on multiple belief and behavior measures. In the new NMS2, and that's just the survey data that they collected, women and men today are about equal in religiosity. Men didn't change much. Women stepped away from their religiosity. They stepped down from it and now are equal essentially with the men. This suggests that the traditional pattern where women were stronger in religious commitment has faded among current members.
That was the study that caused, was it Keith Erickson on his podcast on behalf of the church and the men in it to call the women back to church because the men needed them there in order to be righteous?
I don't remember. Rebecca, do you know that?
Yeah, no, I remember that. Absolutely. It was the idea that, the woman is what keeps the family together. The woman stokes the fire of religion, well, let him back, let him on the stand. Maybe that would help. But they would always tell the stripling warrior story, right? The mothers are the ones that have the key to your children continuing, on the gospel path. So that was a huge narrative always. And especially, being a woman, we heard that all the time. It's going to be your job to police everyone in your family and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. You got to pray away their free agency. And that is extreme pressure for a woman. It all rests on your shoulders in the family.
Yeah, and I'll just add here, you've sort of taken, sort of is the wrong word. You have taken women for granted forever. They've really been sort of the glue. Again, they're the mothers of the children, so they're the ones bearing the next generation. If the mom says the kids are going to church and there's that debate, it's the women who often win those kinds of discussions. The church leaders took the women for granted forever. And now it looks like it's biting them in the rear end. That women have finally recognized, like, oh, this church, again, being aware of how the world works in today's modern age, you can't help but see things going on in the world that in past generations, without the internet, without social media, you just wouldn't have seen. And more so than ever, women have in their awareness what other religious systems do, how other cultures work, how the Western society works, and they're noticing where the church falls short, and they're choosing their own inner voice to make decisions about how they're going to live their life, and it is stepping back in significant ways from adherence to LDS belief and LDS practice. Okay, so that's this one. Now I got one more that's on the negative side, and then we'll get to the study which said some things were better, some things were worse. We'll get to the better here next. This one here is Gen Z rates of weekly church enjoyment. This is where my picture came from, are low compared to older members. When asked how they feel about sacrament meeting, only 31% of Gen Z give it the highest possible rating. Nearly half give it a neutral or meh response. Older generations are much more likely to find sacrament meeting uplifting. So younger members may attend, but they are less emotionally engaged in core worship services. They're bored. They're not enjoying it. At best, it's neutral. Only 31% of them said, yeah, I'm having a great time here. So in a church that has, let's say, a 35% activity rate, and that's probably high, what we're acknowledging is that less than half of that 35% are having even a neutral time, right? Half of neutral, 31% are having a pretty good time. Younger members may attend, but they're less emotionally engaged in core worship. Okay, now, here was the good. Gen Zers who remain LDS are strong in some outward practices. So among Gen Z members who still identify as LDS, 68% attend church every week. That's comparable to older members. They are on par with Gen X and boomers in temple recommend holding and mission service rates. Again, a lot of people are disinterested or less devout. Of the people who identify as LDS, these would almost certainly be generally the people who still are attending, claim belief. They are staying in line with the older members in terms of how active they are and holding a temple recommend and going on missions. So what I noted here was that this is a complex pattern. Younger members who stay may still participate in visible commitments even as private devotion declines. Now, this made me think of a thing, and that's what I've got over here to the right, and I'll read this really quick. The data shows two things happening at the same time. On one hand, many younger Latter-day Saints are stepping away or becoming less adherent altogether, much more so than past generations. This is a problem for the church. On the other hand, those who do stay, those Gen Z members who remain LDS often show strong outward religious behaviors. So they're doubling down, right? Such as weekly church attendance, temple recommend holding, missionary service. At first glance, that can look like evidence of renewed strength. But sociologically, it often signals something else. It's called the sorting effect. And it's where those who stay are not average believers, but they're the most invested ones. When people watch friends, siblings, or entire peer groups walk away from a belief system, it creates intense cognitive dissonance. The mind experiences threat. If people like me are leaving, then maybe the system itself is unstable. And that possibility is psychologically terrifying. For many believers, the solution is not doubt, but doubling down. The belief becomes less flexible and more identity bound. Faith stops being something you hold and becomes something that holds you. And it's not just a Mormon thing. This is something that psychologists have observed as a pattern for decades. When deeply held beliefs are challenged, evidence rarely softens them. Instead, it often hardens them. And a sociologist who joined with two other guys in writing the book When Prophecy Fails, this was from New York, Harper and Row, 1956. One of those is named Leon Festinger. And this is how he put it. He said, a man with a conviction is a hard man to change. Tell him you disagree, and he turns away. Show him facts or figures, and he questions your sources. Appeal to logic, and he fails to see your point. We have all experienced the futility of trying to change a strong conviction, especially if the convinced person has some investment in his beliefs. We are familiar with the variety of ingenious defenses with which people protect their convictions, managing to keep them unscathed through the most devastating attacks. And I will note this with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I've used this example before. They've predicted on multiple occasions, I think twice in the late 1890s, once in like 1914, maybe sometime in 1904, 1907, something like that. But there's 3 or 4 times that they, in a matter of a few decades, predicted that Christ would return. When he didn't show up in each of those moments, there was a group of not Latter-day Saints. There was a group of Jehovah's Witnesses who stepped away from the faith entirely. And they just said, like, you made a prophecy. It didn't come true. This is nonsense. I'm moving on. For the people who stayed, they believed even stronger when that thing happened. You would think that thing would weaken their faith, but often it has what they call the backfire effect, where something goes wrong and it actually causes the person who needs that belief system to be true to actually believe in it even stronger. All right. I think that is my last slide. So I'm going to go back here, take this off the screen. We have been saying for a long time, I know we believe the church is having a problem. It's experiencing people leaving. It's experiencing people stepping away from adherence, loyalty, devotion. And the church keeps claiming that it's as strong as ever. It's all the numbers show it's growing.
Stronger.
Yeah. Both of those things, there are ways in which both those things could be true. We could be looking at an American section of the church, and meanwhile, the growth over in Africa and Portugal or wherever else is so much stronger that it makes up for and more than the loss.
Remember the second quote that I said it was obviously false?
Yeah.
Every region of the world.
Yep.
Every place we get data from outside of, I'll say Africa. I think Africa is growing at least in terms of baptisms at a rate that would make it easy for the church to brag about. Every place that we're getting data otherwise, we're getting data that says the church is in decline. And what I was going to ask you guys is, if that's true, the church is declining, it wants to keep saying a different narrative around its numbers, how long will it take before the difference is so big that the church has to start making the numbers come back to where reality is?
I don't think they'll ever have to come back to reality. And what you described, and I love that final statement that you read, is what I like to call the wheat and the tares syndrome. And I've heard this from people. I'm the wheat, not me, I'm a tare, have actually been called a tare before, but the people who stay are the wheat. And it doesn't matter what happens. They are so invested, and they're so, I think, culturally a Mormon. And for various reasons, they need to be a part of it so much that there's nothing that would ever dissuade them from being a part of it anymore. And it's interesting how you kept saying the performative aspects of Mormonism, of which there are many, are the things that people are looking at to say this is an active person. Well, I will point to myself, and I've said it before, since I was a child, I was an atheist, agnostic, yet on paper, I was the most active Mormon you could believe. Every meeting, reading my scriptures, graduating seminary, keeping the word of wisdom, praying 8 times a day, fasting 24 hours since I was 8 years old. I, on paper, was the most active person in the world. But in my little dark heart, not at all, right? But there were many reasons to stay and to identify and to continue to be counted on that side of the tally sheet, right? Until there weren't. So I just think this is an interesting phenomenon. And anecdotally, as I look at faithful social media and even get messages from people in the LDS community, they're saying that people that are younger, they do have a temple recommend. One of the secret lies from Mormon wise women has a temple recommend and went to the temple during one of their little outings where they had to kind of trap Marciano. Yeah, some of you know what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is they're doing things that work for them. And they say things like this, wearing the garments every day just doesn't work for me. And I'm fine with that. And I know God is fine with that. I'm okay. I like to drink coffee and that works for me. This is what they're saying. They are making their own rules and still considering themselves an active member. They are so brave. I would never have dared to do any of that, even though I wanted to, right? I was just pretending, living a lie, all of that. So I admire all of them. I think the stats mean nothing. And I don't think that the church will ever be able, even when the numbers get so out of control that everyone can see it, you're just not going to see it. Everybody is the child in the emperor's new clothes, but nobody is listening or paying attention. So we'll just keep reporting. I guess that's all we can do.
I just want to remind everybody that I've been on record since the very beginning calling all of these lies by the church. lie after lie after lie, talking about how it's growing and growing. And man, it's really growing this past year like crazy. It's incredible, more than it's ever been growing before. No, it's not. And the reason I bring that up is because study after statistic ends up bearing out the fact that I am right. So here's the question. If the church, first off, let's admit, of course, that the church's growth rate has no direct connection whatsoever with any of the church's truth claims, except in so much the church is invested in this idea that it does. But whether it grows or stops growing as much or starts tapering off has nothing to do with whether it's true, right? Just whether it's popular. So all I'm saying is that if the church will lie to you about something that has nothing to do with its truth claims, what will it not lie to you about when it does come to the truth claims?
Good point. I want to put one more thing. I'm so glad you mentioned wheat and tares. It reminded me of one thing in this article that I forgot to put into the slideshow. But here's a quote from that Religion News article. This was another surprise, given the rising tide of young adult disaffiliation discussed above. But maybe it shouldn't have surprised us. As more young adults leave the church, it becomes that much more of a conscious commitment for those who want to stay. They're watching their friends leave. The people they have connection with are stepping away. So it requires something different about you to put your foot down and to stay in while you're watching those you have relationships with walk away. Incidentally, some Orthodox church members have called this the sorting, the wheat and the tares. And the author here, Jana Reese, notes this is an offensive and problematic way to regard human beings, as she's written about before. Can we agree that referring to other people as discardable weeds is uncool? And so I just want to note, like, the language that Mormon leaders have taught us to use about those who stay and those who leave is offensive, and it needs to stop. And you ought to honor the people who leave as having made the best decision for their own lives, just as much as we should honor the people who stay for having made the best decisions for their lives. The only thing I want is all the information on the table so everybody can make an informed decision about what they do one way or the other. All right. That's the end of that story. If you guys have any other comments, I'm happy to hear them.
Rebecca, you're Miss Tear of 2026, aren't you?
That is, I think, the award that I won last week. Yes, Miss Tear of 20.
And everything.
Yeah, that's it.
That's wonderful. You know, I'm not wheat or tares. I am hops, baby.
You're hops. Well, really, the scripture means that it's Christ that's supposed to decide. And anyone who says, I'm a wheat, you're a tare, is probably somebody that's a tare, because they're not being very nice. And it's really up to Christ. And Christ might surprise you on who he considers a wheat or a tare. But it certainly is a way to double down, to say, you know what? I know something all my friends don't. And for me, I'm staying. So, but yeah, it's very.
I will certainly be surprised if he considers me wheat.
You think so? I don't know.
Oh, I'll be very surprised.
I think you're a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
One more little thing.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Oh, is there more, Bill? Or is this something we already went through?
This is something we went through already. But remember, we all on this side of things felt like he was speaking to us when they talked about lazy learners and lax disciples.
Oh.
I just want to note, the data indicates that it's those on the inside, at the younger generations of the members of the church, that the study points out those are the lazy learners and lax disciples. They have had steep declines in scripture study, daily prayer, and garment wearing. If that's not how you would define someone becoming a lazy learner and a lax disciple, I don't know how you would do it.
That's brilliant. He wasn't talking to us. He was talking to those dumbass Gen Zers.
Wow.
He was. With that,
and now I can get behind it.
Yeah. I don't know how to segue that to this.
I don't either.
Story. This
use
is
Canada.
This is
use Canada somehow
here as well, but an unfortunate incident here happened.
Oh, that. Sorry.
No, this is my story. No, this is extremely sad. And, the more I kind of dug into this young woman's, social media, she just seemed like an amazing, bubbly, fantastic, so excited. It's just heartbreaking. I don't know. This has been really disturbing. So I'm sure most of you are aware of this story. It was was it Wednesday? I think it was Wednesday. Suddenly on social media, I started getting people sending me things saying that there was a young woman who was missing at the Red Rocks recreational hiking trail. And the thing that made it kind of interesting was that her mission farewell was going to be on the 18th on Sunday. So, that's of interest. And we're all wondering what's going on, what happened. She went out hiking in the afternoon. Someone on social media did say that she had gone to gather her thoughts for her farewell on Sunday. She was going to Rome, Italy on her mission. And there's a picture on the right from an Instagram reel where she's opening her call. I'm not kidding. She just looks like the cutest, bubbliest, it's just heartbreaking to watch this. And so we were all, concerned and wondering. And, of course, nobody knew what was happening. Looks like they searched for her. The call came in, like later at night. They searched for her till the afternoon. They had to stop because of lightning. The next morning, apparently a family member did find her in the cavern there. And then alerted the police. So it was a family member that found her. But the headline then finally was, family friends say 18-year-old woman died while hiking alone near Red Cliffs recreation area. And there's a picture. I should say her name is Nicole Bennett. I didn't say her name because we've all been following this so closely that, it's a given. But her name is Nicole Bennett, and she's from the St. George area. And again, her farewell was Sunday the 18th. She was leaving on her mission to Rome, Italy, and her birthday, I believe, was like the very next day or within the next couple of days when she would turn 19. It was just so tragic, everything that was happening around it. So in the article here, it says Nicole Bennett, 18-year-old woman, reported missing the night of January 13th, found dead the next morning near the Red Cliffs recreation area, died in a hiking accident, according to her family and authorities. And then the family put out a statement, someone connected to the family. We want to provide reassurance that her death was the result of an accident, not suicide, and thank you for your concern. She fell while out hiking alone. Her body was found with her scriptures, mission prep guide, and Italian dictionary beside her. Now, that's very interesting. She must have had them in a backpack or something in order for that to happen after such, a drastic fall. But of course, there were other things swirling around social media, which is why the family had to come out and say this, because when you hear someone very young and a fall like that, there, you think foul play, you think slip and fall, you think, as they said here, sounds like they had to address it. Is it a scenario where she was overwhelmed and took her own life? But so far, the family has said that it was simply a fall, and it looks like, although it does say it's sort of still under investigation, it looks like that is right now what the public statement is. It says, Washington County Sheriff Office search and rescue confirmed that Bennett died as a result of an accidental fall near the Red Reef Trail. She was planning, again, LDS mission farewell on the 18th. So I have a couple more pictures. Apparently she was a baker. She loved to bake. And just, again, just so cute. Look at that smile. I mean, just an adorable girl, and so tragic. We don't need to read the entire article. I think I've gone over almost everything. But yeah, just really sad, and just last week, we had reported on that young missionary in New Mexico who had passed away. And as I understand it, they're still working on an autopsy. They don't know exactly what happened there, but this is just a tragedy. And it was picked up I think People picked it up, AOL. I've seen it, Daily Mail. It's been picked up in some bigger magazines. So, but just, heartbreaking as we followed it, and, just one of the most tragic accidents. I'm guessing probably the narrative is going to be, that now she's called on another mission, and that is consoling to the family, right? That brings peace. And that's what they need right now, because I keep using the word heartbreaking, but it completely is a tragedy. Any thoughts on that story there?
Yeah, it's very sad. No other mission's going to be better than Rome, though.
That's one of those designer missions that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
There's so many hiking trails in southern Utah and lots of mountains around. I'm not familiar with this particular trail or what the dangers of it are, but maybe just a reminder to all of us, especially when hiking in the dark or at night, late in the evening when there's not as much sunlight, to just be careful. Things can happen in just a split moment. I remember going with family to the Grand Canyon, and there are so much about that is beautiful and amazing. And I could also see why accidents happen with all the ways that you get extremely close to the canyon itself and are at quite heights. And really, it's up to you to be safe about that. And so just another instance where you're just on a hiking trail and it seems safe as can be down in southern Utah, but we all ought to be just a little extra careful.
Okay.
All right. Well, with that, the next story we've got here is the Peacemaker Summit. This is Lucifer's Lantern?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'd like to know about this, RFM.
Lucifer's Lantern is a blog, and we teased this a little bit last Friday on Mormonism After Dark. Here's the rest of the story. The Peacemaker Summit and an attempt to silence Mormonism's critics. This is by Mason, dated January 12, 2026. An upcoming event called the Peacemaker Summit, organized by the Holy Rebellion, is being promoted as a gathering for faithful LDS creators. The organizing vision for this event is explicitly about displacing critics of the faith by, wait, that's me. Bill, that's you. Rebecca, that's you too. The organizing vision for this event is explicitly about displacing critics of the faith by flooding social media platforms with coordinated, high-volume, pro-Mormon dreck. I'm sorry, it says content here. That goal deserves some scrutiny, so let's scrutinize it, shall we? Oh, here's the two guys at the Holy Rebellion. The one on the right looks like he looks like Stephen Bukakis Smoot's better-looking brother. The stated aim: outnumber the critics. Travis Lish. Wow, his parents must have really hated him. Travis Lish and Christian Williams from the Holy Rebellion have been clear about their motivation. They believe critics of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints dominate online spaces. Well, that's nice. And that faithful voices need to overwhelm that presence. The solution being proposed is to create enough volume to hide criticisms from search results. Does that make sense to you, Bill and Rebecca, people who know more about computers and the internet than I do?
If you have a million things to find that are good, the chance of you finding the critic who's saying those mean, nasty, false things about your church, just a lot less likely that they're going to be found.
Is that what you understand, Rebecca?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sheer volume and sheer numbers. Although I will point out that anytime there's a faithful podcast that starts, viewership is always double or triple what the rest of us have. You know what I mean? We tend to get viewers that come and go as they should, leave to go live your life. But on the faithful side, there must be a constant stream of reassurance that you're okay and what you believe is okay. Yeah. And so I monitored some of the podcasts, for example, that started about the same time that I did, you know, and there are 3-4 times more subscribers, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I love my subscribers the best.
Well, so, as Schopenhauer said, if you write for idiots, you will always have a large audience.
That's exactly right.
Probably goes the same for podcasting. If you podcast for idiots, you'll always have a large audience.
Well, and the other thing we're not thinking of is just, you know, AI. If enough people are putting these truth claims and spins, today I looked something up and I was stunned that it was a completely faithful answer. You know, just using ChatGPT, I'm like, oh, come on. You can't tell me you can't reach out there and find some other opinions. It was like bearing its testimony to me. So if you do flood, you know, content like that out there, it is going to skew everything that comes out.
Well, we're going to read a little bit more about this because this made me think of something. I'll get to it here in a second once we have a little more background context. So Holy Rebellion, the Holy Rebellion, these guys that I've never heard of before are sponsoring this Our goal is 1 billion views per month, they say. That sounds like Dives. He said something like that a few years ago. Our goal is 1 billion views per month. Collectively, as Latter-day Saint creators.
He's still only getting like 300, right?
Yes, but he tries harder.
All right.
Imagine a world where when you search Mormon or LDS or Joseph Smith across any platform, what you would see is dozens of people proclaiming their faith and their witness towards them, rather than dozens of detractors. We see and hope for a future where we flip the script and we can control, in large part, that algorithm online. So this is a quote being attributed, I think, to these guys, Travis Lish and Christian Williams, the Holy Rebellion. Okay, so that's their goal. By the way, I just want to say this, okay, because it did occur to me as I'm thinking about this. If you did something like this, because they're also having other podcast, famous, faithful content creators like Jasmine, okay, Jasmine Rappley, and a few others. The question I had was, wouldn't doing something like that dilute their programs just as much as our programs? And then I thought, if that's true, then maybe they have a special plan to avoid having that happen, so they end up on top. And then I thought, how could they do that? And I thought, well, maybe if they signed all of these people who are excited to do podcasts up under their own umbrella. What do you think about that idea?
I'll just say that there's only so much time and energy anyone has to listen to things. And if you flood with, David Alexander and Jasmine Rappley and Jacob Hansen and the Midnight Mormons, Word Radio, you can only listen to so much. Even if you try to listen to it all, you can't. And so if you just have 100 other podcasts, now everybody is getting less views, it would seem like.
And especially it would impact especially the faithful ones like they are, because these are more of the same kind.
Same search terms, say everything. And I think this is already starting to happen with the missionary reels and videos and TikToks flooding the market. I mean, they're so, come to church with me, be my friend, right? People are tired of that. They are I know I should make one, right? Come to church with me, be my friend. They are everywhere. It's too much. It's quantity, not quality. And I think in the end, that does not work. That returns to bite you in the what.
I think the church has always emphasized quantity over quality.
By the way, Rebecca, that might be what's leading to, at least in part, again, we understand it's some things that the critics are saying. It's the church being more, I'm not to say honest, but more forthright about its history. But it also might be this flooding of things and talking about issues everywhere, even from a faithful point of view. Mm-hmm. It's the old adage, you send people to Fair Mormon, they learn 1,000 more problems. If you're constantly rehashing problems from a faithful perspective, you're still encouraging people to go look further, to think about things that maybe they weren't planning on thinking about, which all may end up causing less devotion in the data.
It's like a fireside where they say, don't you read the CES letter? And everyone's like, CES letter? But this reminds me of sort of what happened to Jasmine. And I don't know that we really talked about this before, but I saw a post on social media. This is while she was still with Scripture Central. And they were saying that, Jasmine puts out quite a bit of content. She deals with a lot of the truth claims. She puts out some of the more wackier, explanations. And her chat was not moderated. So people were getting in there, faithful and nuanced, and some that were posting going no, and they were spilling the straight facts right there. And so her subscribers were learning from that chat. Oh, I did not know that, And so that was interesting that some of these, sure, you can flood the world with content, but can you moderate, can you follow the comments and the chats and people that are going to discuss this again from a faithful perspective? Some of them were saying, this is too far out there. You can learn a lot. And like you said, that absolutely opens a Pandora's box. Any discussion is going to raise awareness of an issue, no matter how you try to approach it.
Well, I do just want to say that unless they have some special cunning plan to get around the obvious, this whole program may end up diluting their own channels more than ours. And this says, This sounds AIE. That's not engagement. It's attempted censorship. By the way, can I speak to all the computers out there? Okay. And the AI people, would you stop telling me what things are not and just tell me what they are? Okay. Because it's really effing annoying. It's attempted censorship. Instead of answering criticism, the strategy is to make it harder to encounter at all. Right. You can't encounter the criticism. That's the idea. Silence the other voice so that people only hear one side of the argument. Brilliant. And top LDS content creators seem to be fully on board to having their shows diluted. This includes Maddie Packer, who I'd never heard of before, but this I think is a picture. She has the Sure Foundation. Jasmine Rappley, who we all know, David Schnell, Mock Schnell, Lauren Yarrow, who I don't know, and 12 plus other creators who I don't know either. The summit as mobilization. The Peacemaker Summit is being presented as a creator-focused event, but the underlying purpose is mobilization. Attendees are being recruited into a coordinated effort with a clear narrative object. Produce content. Be consistent, hide the critics. And here is the Peacemaker Summit in case you want to drop by. It's February 7th. It's 8 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock p.m. Now that says PST. That's Pacific Standard Time. So it could be 9 to 2 there. You'd have to check it out. But it is at 2476 West Sycamore, Lehigh, Utah, 84043. General
That is
admission
right
is
in my neck of the woods. Should I stop by?
Well, general admission is $20, and you can, I think, buy tickets online.
Does it have an online option, just like to view and participate that way?
Yes.
Or is it in person?
Yes, it does. I saw that. So, and they says the Holy Rebellion, Peacemaker Summit, February 7th, 2026. Tired of misinformation controlling the narrative of the Church of Jesus Christ online? Damn straight. That's why we're here, sucker. That's why we're here. Because we're sick and tired of the, what is it? I was on the wrong paragraph. We're sick and tired of your misinformation from the church controlling the dominant narrative online. That's why we're here. That's where we come in. But in this bizarro world in which the apologists live, that goes on, then this is for you. We can take the narrative back. And you don't have to be a creator to do your part. Wow. I wonder how they do their part if they're not a creator. So the time is here to flood the earth with the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Together, we can reach every continent, clime, and village around the world. The only strategy that will work is peacemaking, by which we mean drowning the other side. Because it's very peaceful when you only have one side of an argument being presented. It's like the sound of one hand clapping. Very peaceful. By the way, that address comes back to the show barn in Lehigh, Utah. If you want to give it a go, that's where it is.
Yeah.
Here's the Peacemaker Summit, and this is from their official advertising on that their website. The time is here to flood the earth. Oh, right. I had read this first part. The only strategy that will work is peacemaking. Over the last 12 months, we've learned that peacemaking is not synonymous with being nice. We are the mean peacemakers. There are rules, especially on social media. We've been practicing and refining these rules, these not nice rules, these mean rules, and we want to share them with you. We believe it's the only way to spread the gospel, the way the Lord intends, because the Lord doesn't want the gospel spread in a nice way. If you're telling yourself that, you're fooling yourself. This is the mean Jesus. Attendees will learn to see through the distortions and engage without fear as true peacemakers. I got a feeling peacemakers means warrior now. Wow. The event will include slightly Orwellian. Over here, there's David Schnell, Schnell. The event will include keynote speakers on the subject of the world needs peacemakers. The world needs you. Maddie Packer, David Schnell, Mock Schnell, and Jasmine Rappley. And then there's going to be a lunch break because that's going to make them very hungry listening to those three. Then there's an open session where it's ask me anything, rapid one-on-one interviews with 12 plus of your favorite LDS content creators. Then number 3, 12:30 to 1:30, the keynote speakers. What is your role in gathering Israel on social media? And Lauren Yarrow will talk about that, and the Holy Rebellion. They'll tell you all about it. Together, we can hasten Christ's return. I'm not sure how they get to that, but if you put a lot more pro-Mormon dreck out there on the internet, Jesus is going to come faster just because he's getting sick and tired of listening to it, I guess. Every one of us plays a part. Let's go to work. All proceeds from this event are used to further the work of gathering Israel, capital G, capital I, by creating more content, training more creators, and establishing more channels for niche audiences or niche audiences. All right. That sounds like an exciting time, doesn't it? I think somebody is planning on making some money off that. Why this matters now. The Peacemaker Summit hasn't happened yet. That's precisely why this deserves attention now. These creators need to be called out on this morally questionable goal. Okay, consider yourself called out, content creators. Once large-scale saturation campaigns are normalized and praised as balance or peace, they become harder to challenge. People lose access to the full range of perspectives without realizing it. And there's Lauren Yarrow talking about how fun it is to wear garments as a Mormon woman. So that's what's going on. And it's going on February 7th, I think it was, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, February 7th at the Show Barn in Lehigh. If you want to go, grab some tickets and you can return and report and let us know what the heck is going on with the Peacemaker Summit. Your thoughts?
Well, I work right by there. I could literally just sneak in. Do you think anybody would recognize me? I'm not exactly sure, but
Well,
I will.
if you wore a disguise.
I could put some sleeves on, then nobody would ever recognize me. You remember, however, that picture reminded me, Surviving Mormonism, the 3-part series on Bravo with Heather Gay, talking about people that have had horrific times in Mormonism. And there was a little mini campaign to flood the internet. Remember this, where they said, I survived Mormonism, but it's just me carrying a bunch of church chairs, trying to put them away. I survived, trivial things about Mormonism. Their goal, and they said it was, let's flood the internet so that nobody sees any kind of information about this documentary Surviving Mormonism. They all see our cute little content. I survived Mormonism, but it was just me trying to get the kids ready for church. They tried this. So it's very interesting that now they're trying it on a larger scale. I also just very quickly wanted to address in the chat, which I always watch, everybody is talking about this new collaboration with Mr. Beast. It is not new. In 2024, the Mormon Newscast reported on this. Mr. Beast and the church collaborated on the Just Serve project. This has been going for 2 years. I think it's just getting, maybe some, a bump up in people finding out about it now. But
we were so far ahead of the game, and I have no doubt it was because of you, Rebecca.
I don't know, but it was a big deal because he's big, philanthropic, huge. And the church's app, Just Serve, where you can go on there and find a place to serve, not through the church, but through, again, it's like the giving machine. It's a service middleman, and Mr. Beast is promoting it. So that's how they're collaborating. But yes, Mr. Beast does list the LDS Church as, I think, a diamond partner in collaboration, somebody that's very service oriented. So it's all about how you present yourself. But I think they've tried. I think distancing itself from the word Mormon is another way that they said, we don't want people to search Mormon and find what we're doing. We want them to search Latter-day Saints and find what we're doing. So they're always trying this.
I've never thought this. I've never been on the sidelines of the content creation that I do and going, I've got to figure out how I get 100 other people to create content too, so that no one will find the church's content or will find the apologist content. I've never even wondered how I keep people from finding David Alexander or Jasmine Rapoli. And when you see that side say that, and it feels yucky. Why if somebody were out there telling an untruth about you, isn't the best thing to do is just to tell your truth? Just tell your truth and let the chips fall where they may. And you're lucky. You are on the team that has the Holy Ghost. You have the unfair cheat code. You've got the advantage. You don't need to flood the earth. You just need people to utilize the light of Christ and the Holy Ghost, and then it'll do its thing. Something about this process says that you don't believe that if they are fairly given the critics' information and your information, that your information will actually be convincing enough to them that you need to make the critics' side disappear. And I think that's a self-acknowledgement about something you've decided in your brain that you don't want to say out loud, which is that you think the other argument is actually more convincing.
Amen. Well put.
As they say, the truth is like a lion. Let it out and it will defend itself. So let people decide.
Oh, so you've got the show barn there in Lehi, Utah. So that'll be a fun little happening. Our next story is another tragic thing that's been going on the last couple of weeks, but there's been some, I'll say, funny business in this tragic thing. And Rebecca, you're here to tell us about what's been going on with the shooting in Salt Lake City and maybe what's been going on behind the scenes.
Yep. And there's a couple updates on this. We all remember, of course, back on January 7th, a lot of us, were staying up at night watching this was happening, a shooting at a funeral that was being held at an LDS meeting house, and 2 people lost their lives. 2 people were killed.
Usually they have the funeral after the shooting, but this night they tried to switch it up some.
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that. But before that happened, and then there was a period of time where the police were coming out and making statements and saying there was a lack of, cooperation. They were struggling with some difficulties in cooperation from the community, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. So there was a period of days where nobody was arrested, nothing happened, the needle did not move, and we were wondering what was happening. Finally, it comes out on, let me see, the 14th. So like a week later, 1 is arrested in connection to deadly Salt Lake City church shooting. And RFM can kind of weigh in on what this means, what he was charged with.
It doesn't mean what that headline is designed to make you think, I'll tell you that.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it sounded really like, oh my gosh. So Ryan Daniel Tutai, 32, was arrested on Tuesday and faces a charge of obstruction of justice. This means he's accused of lying or covering up information about what happened that night. So obstruction of justice, is that very serious, RFM?
No, it's a misdemeanor in Washington.
Okay. So it says during a police interview, Tutai, I'm afraid that I did look up how to pronounce it, but that was like a week ago and I made it short and I've forgotten. Tutai, I think, claimed he had taken an Uber to the church and that he was inside when he heard gunshots from the parking lot. He denied any involvement with the altercation and denied having any knowledge of what had happened. He also denied having a firearm or seeing anybody with a gun that night. When asked what happened to his Dodgers hat, which I guess he was seen wearing, he told the police he didn't have any idea what happened. He didn't know. So multiple witnesses allegedly gave a description of one of the suspects involved that matched Tutai, and officers also received numerous tips that he was involved in the shooting and had a confirmation that another man in the parking lot. After seizing his phone, the police said a search revealed video that showed him with a gun similar to the one found at the shooting scene. Additional videos allegedly showed him driving a car with one of the other men involved in the altercation.
We're still talking about Dodgers hat guy Tutai?
Yeah. This is the same person. All these things are why the police picked him up. The man seen with Tutai in the video allegedly later showed up at a hospital with a gunshot wound. So all of these things are the reason that this individual was arrested on obstruction. So how do all these things fit with obstruction? That's what I was trying to understand.
Well, obstructing is lying or covering up information. It says it right there. Okay. So apparently what they're saying is that based on what he told the police, it wasn't consistent with the video that they saw of the guy in the Dodgers hat, presumably the same guy doing all these other things.
Right.
So once again, everybody, if an officer is talking to you about a criminal investigation, all right? If you don't say anything, you're within your constitutional rights to shut up, all right? If you start talking, then you have the duty to be honest, at least if you are caught lying when you have foolishly given up your right to remain silent and decided to talk to the cops. If you're caught lying, that can be its own crime.
Hmm.
So I expect they're arresting him and trying to put the squeeze on him to try and get him to talk some more and give up more information.
So there
Because
could be
they've got
other.
enough for obstructing. They don't have anywhere near enough for the shooting, right? They don't have enough
That was my
murder, so they've
question.
got to try and get some more
Yeah,
evidence.
that sounded like a lot of information, though. And I'm sorry I didn't switch the slides. I was reading the slides off my phone. It sounded like a lot of information that you could be maybe arrested for perhaps being one of the perpetrators, but I guess not enough.
I don't see it.
Okay.
I don't think a jury would
You're the
convict based on it.
professional. Yes, you would know. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on this. But the police have brought someone in connection. And before that happened, people were like, "What is happening? Why, has nobody, why has nothing happened?" So, and then interestingly, I mean, it is extremely tragic. This is a picture of one of the individuals that was killed, and his funeral was last Friday, and it was going to be at an LDS meeting house across the street from an elementary school. And it was announced people were going to go to this location for the funeral. They notified the school district, they notified the elementary school, and then all of a sudden, the venue was changed, as the headline here says, "Funeral for victim of LDS Church shooting in Salt Lake City moved due to safety concerns." So, could have been the elementary school. I feel like the LDS Church said, although this is your ward or whatever, you're supposed to be able to have a funeral here. We don't want this again, right? We don't want this on our premises, to the effect that they, here in the article, it says the new location for the funeral service will not be on any LDS owned facility, but the church said that they are supporting the family and helping out with costs related to holding the funeral at a different location. So the LDS Church actually looks like paid or gave some kind of monetary help so that the funeral would not be at the meeting house, which I'm assuming must be the meeting house of one of the family members or the deceased. You typically have your funeral right there where the family is. But in this case, they paid for another location. So I thought that was very interesting. It tells me they were concerned that there might be something else that could happen again, and they just don't want any part of that. So this is a picture. There were multiple reels and TikToks out about this funeral, and it looked very similar to the other funeral as far as dress and beverages, things like that. But it is a different location here, and really, really sad. Any thoughts on the LDS Church? Very quickly, it was supposed to be on Friday at that location. Then it was somewhere else on Friday. So
you can tell immediately what happened here. Here's why. Okay, so it's across the street from the school. There's a safety concern, meaning that because this is tied to gang violence, somebody could show up at the funeral and hurt someone, shoot someone, kill someone. That can happen wherever the funeral is held, unless it's being held at the police station. You have it at a funeral home, you have the same safety concerns. So if it was just a matter of being across the street from a school and we just don't want to have it there, it would have been moved to another LDS chapel, because we're talking Utah. They're all over the place. They're blocks away from each other. It would have been no big deal to move it to a different one, just not near a school. It's not a matter of just being a safety concern, because it's a safety concern at the funeral home that it was held at. This was the LDS Church saying, I do not want this held at an LDS church. And that becomes clear because it wasn't held in an LDS church. They just moved the safety concerns to a non-LDS facility. That requires LDS leadership to, from the top down, to go, now that we've caught wind of this ain't happening here. We'll pay for it so that there's not any argument, but it's getting moved. It's not happening at any LDS chapel or ward building, stake center, anywhere on planet Earth. So figure out what you want to do. If you want the help getting it paid for, you'll take our offer and you'll move along.
Yeah, I agree. And I do feel that it was a higher up that finally said, okay, this, because we all questioned, we've all seen the video of the original funeral where the shooting happened, and we questioned, how is this even happening here? And we also have outside voices in the wider Christian community saying the LDS Church seems to be pretty naive about this type of thing. Other churches have this scenario and they have protocols in place. They seem to just be not even aware of what's happening. I think now someone's aware. And this is a first step here of saying, not in our building. What do you think, RFM?
I think that the LDS Church would have been foolish to have allowed, under the circumstances, a second funeral to take place on church property. And yes, they made the right call. You can't be here. Now, obviously, they gave them money as a peace offering, right? Like you said, Bill, no hard feelings, which lends itself to the interesting observation that the church is actually now using the widow's mite from the widow in Parowan to bury gang members in Salt Lake.
Wow.
And I could just about guarantee, I'd love if somebody knows where it was held. But I could just about guarantee that where the funeral ended up being held was further away from the neighborhood where this person lived than the next closest ward building.
It did say undisclosed. It did say undisclosed location, because the address for that meeting house by the elementary school, that was everywhere. Come to the funeral here, right? Then later on in the article, it was moved to an undisclosed location. And I've watched the video. You can see him on TikTok trying to figure out where that is. I'm not super familiar, but it does kind of look like it's not necessarily right in a neighborhood. It looks, maybe, I'm sure someone will know where it is, but undisclosed. So they were not taking any chances at this point.
I think that was at the show barn in Lehigh.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh.
By the way, undisclosed at a funeral where you invite, say, 100 people really isn't undisclosed.
Yeah, I know, it's disclosed.
How are they going to find their way?
I'm pretty sure it's disclosed, but yeah. So anyway, we'll keep you updated on anything going on with this, if there are any other arrests, but this is the first of the two victims that I'm aware of, at least. I don't think the other funeral has taken place, and really sad. The videos that I saw, it was very well attended. There were so many people there, and it was really sad. So we'll see what happens with the other one.
Well, talking about victims, let's go to RFM and talk about the great victim of the state of Texas.
Yes, so the church buys Texas. San Antonio Express News, Mormon church investment arm buys nearly 3,000 acres in the Hill Country. Now, this is an area that's not far from Austin, so I recognize it immediately. It's considered by many to be the nicest place in Texas, which isn't saying a lot, actually. Having been there, but it's as nice as it gets. I know I'm going to get all sorts of hate mail from people in Texas. DG's probably writing furiously as I speak. But this is from January 14th. Now, this windy line in this picture, that is the Blanco River. And the area that the church bought, which is almost 3,000 acres, is over here to the left/west of that river. To the right of that river is the town of Kyle. So what the church has done is bought this whole area over here, and Kyle, the not the church historian, but the city, has had long-time plans of expanding west and building a bridge over the Blanco River to connect. And that is what the church just ended up buying. I think the reason it got sold to them by three people, three property owners were involved in this, selling it to the church, is because they're kind of at a standstill with an environmental group suing them in court to not allow this to go forward or happen. And that suit is still in limbo. It's not done. So the church is stepping into those shoes as well in the middle of a lawsuit. So the real estate investment arm of the church has purchased nearly 3,000 acres of ranch land in the city of Kyle. And like I said, it's a property that has been entangled in a lawsuit from an environmental group seeking to prevent the land from being developed. All right, so there's the Nance Ranch. The Nance Ranch is right there. You can see it's in Hays County. I'm not going to read each of those. This is a picture of the Blanco River, though I think it's got to have been touched up some, because I don't think you're going to find water like that anywhere in Texas, at least not that I ever saw. with the possible exception of Barton Springs, by the way, which was amazing in Austin. All right, it could be developed with up to 9,000 living units in this area of 3,000 acres. There was a development agreement that the city of Kyle approved in 2016, 10 years ago, when it annexed the land. So this is part of Kyle. Now, will it be developed? And will the church be doing the developing? Save Our Springs, that's the name of the environmental group that's been suing them. One of their representatives said it would literally pave the way for unmanaged sprawl in one of the most environmentally sensitive and currently rural areas in our region. So that's their point of view and why they have this lawsuit to prevent it from being developed. This picture is like the first one. You can still see the Blanco River there winding through it, but the purple outline, that is the actual acreage, the almost 3,000 acres that the church bought. And there you can see where it extends in the upper right area along the Blanco River for that space. And then it goes back. And that is what it is the church has bought. And over there across the river, you can see hometown of Kyle. There's downtown Kyle, Texas. It's not a big sprawling place or anything. It's no Dallas, okay? It's just Kyle. And the property reserve, here's some of the things that the church owns. I want to go ahead and mention this. As of 2026, as a recap, everybody, the Church of Jesus Christ is estimated, the LDS Church, is estimated to own over 2.3 million acres of private land in the United States. 2.3 million acres. Wow. I think that's a lot. This extensive portfolio makes it the second largest private landowner in the nation, trailing only the Emerson family. Wish my last name was Emerson.
Who is the Emerson family? I want to know.
I don't know, but I think that they should be donating to the show. That's what I think. Overview of land ownership by the church. Church manages its land primarily through investment in agricultural arms such as Farmland Reserve Inc. and Ag Reserves. Total U.S. acreage estimated at 2.3 million to 2.5 million acres. Total estimated value around $16 billion. Here's the major holdings the church has. In Florida, about 678,000 acres, nearly 2% of the state's land mass, is owned by the church, including the 295,000 acre Deseret ranches. In Nebraska, they've got around 370,000 acres in Nebraska. In Washington, the church outbid Bill Gates to acquire the 22,500 acre Easter Day farm for $209 million. Recent activity in late 2024 and early 2025, the church finalized a $289 million purchase of 46 farms, totaling over 41,500 acres across 8 states, including Arkansas, Mississippi, and the Carolinas. And then Texas, what we just finished with. As of early 2026, the church has acquired nearly 3,000 acres in the Texas Hill Country. So slowly and surely, the church is actually buying up the world. And that's the end of that story. Any thoughts from you, Bill or Rebecca?
Man, we were part of a religion, and I was in Ohio, and I just thought it was this church thing with these prophets, seers, and revelators, and some 70s, and just doing the church thing. You know, maybe some bishop storehouses, and they owned some land at the Johnson Farm and some land in Nauvoo. But come to find out, man, the church part of it is the tiniest little part of this thing, and it seems like that's sort of a front for a lot of other things. And they don't really want to talk out loud about a lot of those other things, but there's a lot of other things, and people ought to read into those. It is a strange thing. My church really was less of a church and more of the nation's largest corporate empire, really.
And Rebecca's got a great story with a shocker about what the church is into now.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna rearrange the order right there and do that. But I do want to say I know. A lot of people do not understand the land holding.
Canadians always get the short end of the stick. But
No, they're not. They're going to get the final story. But my story in blue there relates directly to this. But I was going to say, I don't think people realize how much just individual members of the church donate their land to the church or properties and things like that. This is a thing. They make it very easy to do. Mineral rights, or, a house, or, I just, in fact, I have a story from a friend who his family decided to donate a house to the church. It was a house they were not living in. It was a property they owned. And it was a big deal to this family. I mean, they really felt we are giving a lot. And they went to Salt Lake to sign the papers. And as they're all sitting there signing over this property, the representative from the church that was there kept looking at his watch. He kept looking around. He was obviously, oh my gosh. And finally, my friend said, look, we're giving this to the church for the building of the kingdom. This is a big deal to us. And the church representative actually said, we literally are just closing on some high-rise condos in Maui. Basically let them know you're nothing, right? So I don't think we even understand the tip of the iceberg on this. I think there's a lot more. And that could segue right into my story in blue. Maybe Bill can flip it right there, and then we'll go back to Canada. Sorry, Canada, no offense there. Here, I can do it. Let's see. There we go. Okay, this is great. I made this back when President Dallin Oaks was called to be the prophet, but of course there was a little mispronunciation and he was called Dallas, right? And I think now we might have an idea of why. Did you guys ever watch the show Dallas when you were growing up? Bill, not. He wasn't even born yet. But what about you, RFM?
No, I knew it was on Friday night, but I never watched it. It was a huge deal. You couldn't help but know about it.
No, it was a huge deal. And I've talked before about how I was raised without TV. So I would make sure that I got a babysitting gig on Friday night so that I could go and I could put the kids get in bed, right? And then I would watch Dallas. I remember babysitting, and I've told this before, for a new family. And when I got to their house, they also didn't have a TV. I was so mad, right? That was the only reason I took the gig, is to watch Dallas. But if you remember Dallas, the big thing about Dallas is they were oil moguls, right? They made all their money in oil. Okay. So my friend, Suspicious Mite, I have had him on our podcast several times, and he's a huge presence on Reddit. He was nominated for Ex-Mormon of the Year and also investigative reporter. He does amazing work. He says he has a lot of time on his hands, but he's brilliant into digging. He's kind of like his own little widow's mite. And I know he does give them some information, but he made a little bit of a discovery that he broke on Sunday night. And this is a post from Reddit. I'll just kind of read it here. If you guys aren't subscribed to him, like follow him on Reddit, do it. Suspicious Mite. He has really good information. Anyway, he says exclusive 51 oil gas wells on church property in Colorado produced 382,389 barrels of oil. And oh my gosh, is that 991,180,000 cubic feet of gas between October 2024 and September 2025. And his point, of course, is, and somehow it's a church. And he has a lot of pictures on his post. This picture on the right, of course, AI. Don't hate me. I just love AI so much. Anyway, he goes on to say, after extensive review, I can confirm that there are at least 51 oil and gas wells currently or previously allowed to operate on Property Reserve Inc. owned land in Arapahoe and Adams County, east of Denver, Colorado. I was actually just in Denver, but not that far east. And I was like, dang it, do I drive over there? No, I didn't. Anyway, if you know where that is, Arapahoe and Adams County. Of these, 34 are active or have active permits. 10 are in development and 7 are abandoned and or plugged. But it means they were operating before. Now, I know how this works. My family had the mineral rights when I was growing up to a pretty big piece of land in Washington State. And a company decided they wanted to come in and drill for natural gas on it. And so they paid my family kind of like a rent to be able to do this for about 10 years. It was really interesting. And then they decided they didn't have the technology to go deeper. And so they plugged it with the promise that probably when I'm 99 years old, they're going to start digging again. They're going to hit natural gas. I'll be a natural gas heiress, but I'll probably die right away. So that's how my life goes. Anyway, so Not that the church is making money off of oil, but the rent that's being paid, and who knows what else. And Suspicious Mike goes on to say, most of the wells are owned by Crestone, but a few are owned by two other companies, Burlington Resource and Web Resource. I do not know the business agreements, and that's what I'm talking about, a rent to be able to drill for oil or gas. There's going to be some kind of little agreement there between these companies and the church, but there is no doubt the church is profiting. Like my family did make some money because drilling was happening on land that we own mineral rights to. Off the drilling and extraction it allowed on its land. You can look at any of these sites by going, and then he gives a website. You can find his post on Reddit and typing in facility ID. Screenshots are from Google Earth, Google Maps Street View, and publicly available Colorado government documents and web page. And he asked anybody to correct him. And then he has a list there of all the wells that he discussed. And those were just the ones, that he could find. So there's that. Sorry, I keep forgetting to switch my slides. I know I photoshopped those guys in from their temple trip. But anyway, I just thought that was absolutely...
Was the difficulty in researching this and confirming it? Because apparently it involves a lot of work. Is it because the church is hiding their ownership of the land?
I think everything is just very... Oh my God. I love the show Landman. Not that, but the actual show Landman. Yeah, I don't know that they're hiding it, but they're certainly, and maybe the Widow's Mite is aware of this. I'm not sure, but it certainly is interesting, and it would be income. There's no way they're not making income if all this drilling is happening. There is some income happening there. And I would say if they own the land and the mineral rights, then it's kind of a double thing. In my family, we only own the mineral rights. So that was part of it, anything that happened underground. But whoever would own the land on top, they also, I'm sure, would be being paid for access and facilities and all that kind of thing. So I don't know. But again, the bottom line is, and this is a church, and all the comments on Reddit that I've seen, they're all like, oh my gosh, seriously. And to speak to your other point, if you look at the Articles of Incorporation of the LDS Church, it talks about a religious arm, right? Like it's a tiny little part of it, and if that ever goes away, everything else keeps going, right? It's just a tiny little feeder, little part.
Dallin Oaks kind of resembles Larry Hagman.
I know. I love that. Put that picture up again. Landman. There you go.
Fortune
Dallin Oaks.
Yeah, Dallin Oaks is Landman. Fortune favors the ruthless on Paramount.
And the real Landman is Billy Bob Thornton. It's an awesome show on Paramount. But yeah, he looks.
I'm loving it.
Yeah.
If it only was Dallas Oaks, or just Dallas Hoax. I think that's
maybe that was like a Freudian slip when he said Dallas. If they're actually in the oil business, maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
all right.
Yeah. Anybody else dig in if they want to know? There's always something more to uncover. And Suspicious Mite is really good at crunching numbers and stats. And
these are the different wells.
Really, yeah. This is the list of the wells. So. The ones that he was able to find and was talking about. So,
well, the next story I think is you as well, Rebecca. This is some maybe a smaller story having to do with the.
Well, we're going to go back to Canada. I think. Remember?
Sounds great.
I skipped Canada. Yes, sorry about that. I just thought that might be. So there's my maple leaf. That's right. So Canada is interesting when it comes to the LDS Church, and probably all of us remember 3 years ago. This is actually kind of the reason the Mormonish podcast started, because I was in contact with somebody who was kind of the tithing whistleblower in Canada. And I didn't have anywhere to put the information, right? And so that's when my co-host Landon said, well, just get a microphone, turn on a camera, start talking. And I'm like, who, me? But apparently it worked out. Anyway, so if we remember that, if we go back to that, this whistleblower, an accountant, discovered that almost all of the tithes from Canada, millions of dollars, were being funneled to BYU. And this is, I'll explain it simplistically, but Canada has laws that charitable contributions made to Canada have to go to the betterment of Canada, the Canadian citizens, the services, the facilities, and the programs that help the Canadian citizens. And this faithful accountant discovered that that was not the case and was horrified, right? So why were the tithes able to go to BYU? Because there is a little loophole where if you have Canadian citizens attending a educational, a university in another country, you can send money there. So I think at the time we looked at it and there were like, I don't know, 19 Canadian students. I mean, it was a very small number, and they were able to send millions of dollars to BYU. So this was all over the news. There was a 60 Minutes about it. It came out about the same time as the Australian tithing scenario. It's funny, in any place where they have to report things and there are records, which is not the US, right? But like Canada or Australia, there's always some hanky panky, right, going on. So I'm always interested in what's happening in Canada with the LDS Church. Now, did you guys kind of pick up on this a couple of weeks ago, where Canada used to be part of the 3 North American regions in the church, as far as having an area rep over them? Canada recently became its own area, the Canadian area, right? So this title here says, sorry, I got to go back here on these.
It's due to growth.
Yeah, it is due to growth. Absolutely. No, it's not a shell game. It's not reshuffling. So it says the LDS Church consolidates in Canada. So I had followed that. If you want more information on that, you can go to the church newsroom. But they basically made their own area presidency. They have everything. It's all kind of consolidated there within the same 2 is it provinces? I can't remember what they have, but Mormons, they all kind of gather. I think it's probably where the polygamists were, right? Probably explains it. But here's something interesting in a news source in Canada. It says LDS Church consolidates in Canada, but theological divides persist. I wonder what that means. So it says all 10 provinces and 3 territories now make up the newly designated Canada area for the church. Previous provinces and territories were divided among 3 North American areas, like I described: Central, Northeast, and West. In August of 2025, so I guess it was a couple months ago.
So church, they used to have 3 areas. Now they're just
Canada
one.
was part of part of an area. I think Central. I think it must have been Central, right? But it was part of something where it also included the United States.
Boom,
now
boom,
they
boom.
cut it out. Has nothing to do with the United States anymore. It is Canada standing alone. So, this group's doctrinal differences, better known as the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is going to have difficulty finding a place among Canadian churches. This is interesting. This organization will not be able to join the Canadian Council of Churches until, in short, they become Trinitarian. The council's general secretary, Pastor Peter Noteboom, told Canadian Affairs. That's the name of the magazine. So
okay, this is a joke, right? Pastor Peter Noteboom.
Yeah, no, I know. Isn't that crazy? I think it's a real person. So basically what they're saying, I just think this is so interesting. The 26-member council represents about 85% of Canada's Christians. The organization does not require doctrinal uniformity, but they do require members to fulfill together their common calling to the glory of one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In addition to this commitment to the Trinity, the council members are committed to confess the Lord Jesus Christ as God and Savior according to the Scriptures. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has difficulty on both counts. The church finds much of its theological basis in the Book of Mormon, a 19th century document that is not part of the Bible. The church describes it as another testament of Jesus Christ. And
Jeez Louise. This is just another Wednesday for Mormons being excluded from being Christian because you don't believe in God in the right way, which is a inherently self-contradictory way that didn't come about until the 4th freaking century after Jesus died.
Exactly. But this 26-member council representing 85% of Christians in Canada are saying that the Mormons cannot play ball here at all. Yeah, they also say that they will not recognize their baptism. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's going on because it's in the news now, new area, new LDS area, the LDS Church is in the news in Canada. So I thought that was extremely interesting. And then, of course, as the LDS
they probably argue about how many angels can dance on the
head of a pin.
On the head of a pin because they're all pinheads.
Because they're all pinheads. I'm sure they do. But on top of that, as the LDS Church tends to do, they like to get involved in legislation, right? Who doesn't? I mean, come on. So here we have the newly formed Canada Area Presidency. There they are. They have put out a statement just yesterday on Bill C-9, and religious freedom. Of course they have. Whenever there's religious freedom, they're going to get involved, right?
Isn't that bill in
And
the Book of Mormon, the C9?
yeah, I think it is. So
Allen
they
11?
basically, I won't read the whole thing, but they say, we have been following recent legislative developments concerning this bill. It's an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places. Access to religious or cultural places. That is the little key, I think. The bill seeks to strengthen existing provisions on hate propaganda and address the willful promotion of hatred. We acknowledge the government's stated objective to enhance protections for identifiable groups under the bill. The groups are defined by characteristics such as race, ethnicity, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, among others, right? So here's a bill where they're trying to shore up and protect vulnerable groups from hate speech, exclusion, things like that, right? So the church has to weigh in. Okay. So it goes on to say Canadians who are targets of hate need strong legal protections. At the same time, right? At the same time, there's always at the same time, these protections should be carefully balanced to prevent misuse that could restrict legitimate religious expression and belief. What do you think they're trying to do here, RFM?
Exclude.
Yeah. They're trying to make sure that they can still continue with whatever rhetoric is part of their religion that may be misunderstood as hate speech or exclusion, right? They're
I thought it also
worried
had to do with excluding certain people from the temple, perhaps.
that you've got right to it. And I don't know that everybody saw this, and I'll show you something interesting in a minute. So, and you guys can pause on this and read it, but that's exactly what's happening. So the area presidency has said, we respectfully urge lawmakers to retain the religious speech defense, which I assume is something like if you're saying it in a religious context or making that exclusion in a religious context, it stands, right? It's not the same as hate speech, or it's not the same as exclusion somewhere else. And also, they would like to add clear language affirming that nothing in the law should be interpreted to infringe upon charter-protected freedom of expression and religion done in good faith, right? In this moment, we reaffirm the principles of freedom and conscience and religion that allows individuals to live openly and responsibly according to their deepest convictions. In a diverse society, reasonable people will disagree. Preserving peace and freedom requires mutual accommodation and respect. So they definitely want to be given a pass because they're a religion, simplistically stated. And here it says, peace is preserved through the responsible exercise of freedom. No freedom, including religious freedom, is absolute. It must be exercised with restraint and reciprocity. I can't even say it. How do you say that word, RFM?
I'm sorry, I was thinking of something else. What were you saying?
I knew you were. Reciprocity. I'm having a hard time. I know you don't listen to
what word is
anything
it? Absolute. You say it absolute. It must be
exactly. We invite all Canadians. And
reciprocity. Is that it?
Yeah, reciprocity.
Okay.
I knew how to pronounce it. Yeah, and here's a map that shows where most of the Mormons are. So I believe that you hit it right on the head. They are trying to say, let's not consider all of this kind of speech uniformly. We need to have protections for religion written into this. We need to still be able to say what we're going to say. And I agree with you. We need to be able to exclude whom we need to exclude from our houses of worship. And so I was over on Faithful social media and they were talking about this. Somebody made a post on Faithful social media and said, hey, have you guys seen this Canadian thing? That post was removed. I do not know why mods would remove that post. It was a simple question about something that was posted on the church newsroom. But even when a post is removed, you can see the comments that were left. So one person says, I read the legislation and it seems that a relevant section might be that you can't restrict access to houses of worship based on protected class or intimidate certain groups from accessing it. It could be construed that LGBTQ individuals do not feel comfortable or safe accessing our buildings. He didn't take it to the next step. The next commenter did. Oh, so that would make temple recommends an issue, right? Right. And I think I remember something like this in Australia, but the concept behind this would be you would not be allowed to ask someone, about your orientation, about anything, and then say, because of your answer, you cannot go in our place of worship. So I don't know. What do you think about this? It's interesting. They had to just get right in there, of course, as they do anywhere, and make sure to protect.
Well, the issue I see is temple recommends being superfluous completely, because anybody can go into a temple regardless of who they are and what they're a member of.
Yeah. America, the United States of America is really the most beneficial space for religions to do whatever the hell they want. Other countries negotiate those kinds of rules and boundaries and policies and procedures differently. It will be interesting to see if any big countries ever take really hardline approaches this way, and how the church would then deal with that. Would the church stop doing temple ordinances, for instance, in those areas, and sort of force those people to come to a place where they can do it their way? Would they? I don't know. I know that when we go back in time to prior to 1978, there was certain inability to grow the church in certain areas that led to the church being open to making the changes that led to the allowing people of color to have the priesthood and go to the temple. And one wonders if certain countries essentially shut themselves off to Mormonism because of policies that were that included rights to LGBT folks within religion. It might be interesting to see what the LDS Church's revelations would be that follow.
Yeah, I think so too. No, and it's fascinating to watch other countries because, like you say, Bill, here it's pretty much locked down. Our Lupa proved that to me, right? You can pretty much do anything, but in other countries, it seems to be a little different. So if anybody wants to read the whole statement, it was just released on the church newsroom, and there are some links that you can click to get more information. I just kind of gave a little overview, but the whole concept is pretty interesting. So
It would
and I
be
think I
very
have one
goading
more.
to the church. It
What
would
was
be
that?
very goading to the church to have to start shutting temples down.
But I mean, what's going to happen if you can no longer discriminate or exclude based on any of those criteria? And that really is kind of the temple recommend interview, right? A lot of those things would
The
preclude
temple is
you
based
from
on
going
exclusion.
in. That's exactly right. Yeah. Even simply saying that I identify as a tea drinker would stop you from being able to enter those doors. So I know it's more complicated than that, and I think I do have that one little last story, Bill. It was just one slide I thought was really interesting. Thanks for bearing with me here. So do you guys remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, or was it last week, where I showed the January issue of the Liahona still said that the
Yes.
prophet was President Nelson and that President Holland was an apostle, and both had since passed away. And I did get confirmation from several people, even though I had found that picture on faithful social media. I wanted to make sure it was real, and people sent me pictures of their, they'd sneak into their parents' house and take a picture of the Liahona. So that's true. But can you see it all? What now the February edition says? I thought this was pretty smart. They'll never have to fix it again. Can you see what that says, or is it too small? It's probably too small.
I can't see it.
All right, let me scroll down there so I can read it exactly. It says now, instead of giving any kind of names, it says prepared under the direction of the first presidency and the 12 apostles. So it doesn't have to give any names. It doesn't matter who dies or who's alive. It's prepared under the direction. There is no name. So that was interesting.
This is so that what happened in January is not going to happen again. And they are sensing there's going to be multiple opportunities to screw that up again in the same way in the near future.
Yeah, I think we've all kind of thought that. But then interestingly, somebody sent me February's The Friend magazine, which is for children. And nobody seems to know what the new era, remember it was called that, the magazine for youth.
Yes.
Now it's called just Youth Magazine, I think. But President Nelson and Elder Holland are listed again in February. How many months is that after President Nelson? October to November, December, like 4 or 5 months later, still listed. So I don't know if the kids will be confused. I don't know if in March they're going to come out with the, prepared under the direction of, but they seem to have a hard time catching up.
If I were Elder Oaks, I'd be firing some people.
Yeah, he deserves his day on the front page of the magazine. He is President Oaks, and he deserves his name to be there. So write your local church leader.
It sounds like somebody got the job because they were related to someone rather than being qualified.
I don't know. But then I was super fascinated when the person sent me the screenshot of that article there that's in the youth magazine, and it's called Why I Chose to Take My Endowments or Get My Endowments at Age 18. And so I think I might cover that next week because I got a copy of that. And back in my day, you did not do that. You could not, unless you were going on a mission or getting married. You didn't do that at all. And now they are just trying to get them in there at age 18. Right?
And you have to be 19
Yeah. No,
to
18.
go on a mission back then.
Well, do you know what? I was thinking that if you can put your papers in 5 months in advance, and you're a girl, you can leave when you're 18, just like a guy. You can take your endowments out when you're 17. If your
Wow.
first day in the MTC or your first week is when you're 18, I still believe that eventually they're going to let 8-year-olds do baptisms for the dead because they already let 11-year-olds. And that just means a more intensive interview and temple recommend. But anyway.
I think they're already letting 8-year-olds lead the church.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I understand that you got to put a magazine together, okay? And it's a big project, and it's like all the president's men every day. So this thing on the inside always stays the same, right? So
Yes.
I can understand spacing it, okay? I get that once. But then after you space it and everybody's laughing at you because you still got President Nelson being the president after he's deceased, then you change it and you change it across the board.
Yeah,
that
they
should be
changed
your
it in one in
Yes.
February, but not the others. That's the thing I can't get. Wouldn't your mind go, oh my gosh, the other magazines? I mean, my mind would go there.
Yeah, it doesn't instill confidence.
No, I don't know.
But by the way, though, you talk about all this change. I mean, these are the guys that now he says you can flirt and secure your date.
Yeah.
As long as it's not too early in your mission. Like wait till the last
Second
of that half.
Wait for the second day.
Mormonism.
But that's always been happening under the radar. I had a college roommate that got engaged on her mission. I talked about that. So it does happen. But now I think it might be encouraged. Like you go in with your interview with the president. He's like, so have you checked out any of the brethren? How do they look to you? What do you think?
Well, there's that. So we've got that story covered. Lots of stuff happening. This is a good week of news. So guys, great job covering all those stories. Very much appreciated. This week on the radar for things you guys are creating. Let's start with you, Rebecca. Actually, let me say this first.
Yeah.
1 spot left. The first session of the second Religious Deconstruction Trauma Support Group is tomorrow night at, I believe, 6 p.m. And we have the entire support group full, except for 1 spot left. So if somebody wants that, you'll want to secure that now. Go to awakenandthrive.org. That's all I'll say. Rebecca, tell us about Mormonish.
You got Bob Barker on the show tomorrow.
I have some fantastic guests. That's all I have to say. So Mormonish is always Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. And I've been trying to get these guys on for a while. There's an organization called the Freedom from Religion Foundation, right? And so the president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation is actually going to be in town next week. And he was on the podcast in addition to the president of the Salt Lake chapter. And they just talked about a lot of things that they're involved in, kind of what they are and what they're not, because there is sometimes a lot of misunderstanding about what a group like that would do or why they exist. So we talked about some issues specific to Utah or to the Salt Lake area. And then we talked about a broader context of across, the whole United States. And, they're just kind of a watchdog group. And when they see religion kind of encroaching, they definitely take some action. So it'll be pretty interesting. 6 p.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday, tomorrow night.
Great.
All right. Great. This is Wednesday's Mormonism Live. And the gist of the episode is why prophetic fallibility doesn't solve the problem. So we'll explain the problem, which is essentially all the mistakes in Mormonism. We'll talk about the various directions that's in. We'll talk about the ideas behind prophetic fallibility being a solution to every one of those facets. And we'll decide, I guess, that night whether fallibility does, in fact, solve all the conundrums of Mormonism. If you just let prophets be people who make some mistakes, they make some mistakes. And if we just let that be, does it solve it?
This is becoming a common trope. And Jacob Hansen was making this argument on Pineacker's show with Colby about how, yeah, they're fallible and you can't trust anything they say when it comes to doctrine, but that's what makes them so true. It makes no sense at all to hear him say it. And we'll see if it makes any more sense as you dig into it on Wednesday, Bill.
Excellent. So there's that. And then I'll just note, I sat down today with Britt Hartley. We interviewed Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight Schrute on The Office. He's got a podcast called Soul Boom. And he also just came out with a workbook that's called the same name, Soul Boom. And his ideas, he's trying to help people find spirituality. He's, he's a comedic actor, but in his private life, he's very serious about this spiritual stuff. And I think we had a great conversation. Britt and I stay on after he leaves. And I think we even had maybe even a better conversation afterwards. So I think folks will very much want to tune in and enjoy this as part of the Almost Awakened podcast.
Cool.
Do you want to talk about Mormonism After Dark on Friday? And then I've got your episode thereafter.
Friday, we'll be doing Mormonism After Dark, and it's going to be a lot of fun like it always is. I hope you take time out of your busy week to relax a little bit with friends like we make a habit of every Friday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. It's called Mormonism After Dark. It's in the lounge. We relax. We hang out. We have a great time. Oh, my gosh. Yes, built by aliens. This is the most recent RFM show, and there's a definite connection with the Book of Mormon. What this does is it gives you the silver bullet to use against any Mormon apologist. Works every time, even when the moon is full.
All right.
That looks awesome. And is that already out? That is already out.
Yes, it premiered last Saturday.
Okay, perfect.
Well, that is everything. That wraps up another episode of the Mormon Newscast. Please hit like. Please hit subscribe. Check out the things that Rebecca and Landon are doing. Please check out Radio Free Mormon. Check out the interview with Rainn Wilson. And otherwise, we'll see you around the corner for another episode of the Mormon Newscast next Monday at 6 p.m. Until then, it'll be interesting to see what Mormonism does and what happens that involves this fun religion that we're all a part of in one way or another. So we'll see you next Monday. Thank you, RFM. Thank you, Rebecca. Have a great night, everybody.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.